Hello, Lower Elementary. Today we're going to start talking about the water cycle. And did you know that all the water that is on our earth now is the same water that was on our earth when our earth was created? Those millions of years ago, when it rained and rained and rained and the oceans were formed and all the water on our earth, the hydrosphere, was formed. And since we continue to use that same water, that water is traveling in a cycle, the water cycle. And today we're going to look closer at what the water cycle is, the parts of the water cycle, and we're going to do a fun experiment.
Here is the water cycle map from our classroom. We are going to take a closer look at the map and the parts of the water cycle. But take a moment to make some observations. You can see the mountains and you can see the clouds above. You can see the river flowing down from the mountain and the groundwater beneath the grass and flowers. You can see the ocean and you can see the sun. Let's begin with the sun. The water and the land and the oceans are all heated by the sun. And as the sun heats the water in the oceans and the waters on the land, it changes it into a water vapor. And this vapor rises into the atmosphere. And we call that evaporation. The sun heats the water begins to turn into water vapor and rise into the air. Let's draw some arrows. So we know that evaporation means that the water is traveling up. Not only is the water from the land and the sea evaporating and traveling upward, water from plants is also evaporating. Plants take in carbon dioxide and they lose water, and that water also evaporates into the atmosphere, and we call that transpiration. Transpiration. And so this, we'll draw some arrows here as this is also moving upward. Water droplets or vapor, water vapor moving upward from the plants. As the water evaporates and transpiration occurs, the water travels upward and it's water vapor and it eventually cools. And those water droplets, that vapor, it attaches itself to dust particles and eventually clouds are formed. And this process is called condensation. Condensation. As the water vapor cools and clouds form. You know what? I think I'll make a cloud here. As the water droplets join together. Eventually, the clouds cannot hold all the water droplets as they become saturated. And then we have precipitation. Precipitation can come in many forms. On our chart, you can see snow over the mountains and rain here. Can you think of other forms of precipitation? So when our clouds are fully saturated, that water is now cycling back down through precipitation. Let's draw some down arrows. As precipitation occurs, rain or snow or sleet, the water begins to collect, and we call this collection. There are many places that the water can collect. Lakes, rivers, as the snow melts and the water travels down the mountain all the way to the ocean. You can also have collection in groundwater when it rains upon our earth and the water soaks into the ground. And even this groundwater flows back to our ocean. Collection. And as that water collects in the oceans and the streams and in the groundwater, you guessed it, the sun begins to heat it and evaporation occurs again. So here is a look at our labeled water cycle map, and I decided to cut out some arrows to show the direction of the flow of the cycle. So we began with evaporation. As the water evaporates, it begins to condensate, goes through condensation as it becomes clouds. After condensation, when those clouds become too full, we get precipitation, which we know can come in many forms. And as precipitation occurs, that water then begins to collect. It collects in many different places, rivers, lakes, oceans. And then the process begins again from collection to evaporation. And this is a cycle. It repeats itself again and again.